Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fiona Wilson, and I have the pleasure of being the University of New Hampshire's Deputy Chief Sustainability Officer. I'm also an affiliate faculty member at Paul College. We're really excited to have everyone here today to this event, Business Investments and the Sustainable Development Goals. Before we get into introducing our speakers, I want to just say some very important thank yous. I want to say thank you to our lead co-host, which is the Responsible Governance and Sustainable Citizenship Project, also known as RGCSCP, which is part of the College of Liberal Arts here at UNH. Thank you to Steve Trascoma for his support of this series of events. I also wanted to thank our organizing partners, the Paul College of Business and Economics, the Carsey School of Public Policy, the Peter T. Paul Financial Policy Center, the Sustainability Institute, of course, UNH Global Education, and their New Hampshire International Seminar. So thank you, everyone, for your collaboration to make this great event possible. I also just want to say a quick welcome and thank you to Professors Betty Woodman, Jennifer Armstrong, and Nina Wingatter, and to their students in their business ethics classes. We're so thrilled to have you here. And I also wanted to say a big welcome to the students in my own Business for People, Planet, and Profit class. So just a couple of pieces of housekeeping before we get started. For students who are here as part of a class, if you want to get credit for attending, towards the end of the event, in the last 5 minutes or so, there will be class rosters posted on the walls of this room. So you can, if you're in the business ethics classes, you can go to one of the two side walls. There are 3 different versions of the roster, so you can go to any one of the 3, and your name will be in alphabetical order by last name. So that's where you should sign in, so that your professors can give you course credit. For students in my own class, the rosters will be up here on this wall. That is the housekeeping. So why are we all here today? We're here today because we want to focus and raise awareness about the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We're going to hear us refer to them today as the SDGs. What are the SDGs? You're going to learn more about that from our panelists. But a nice way to sort of shortcut that is they really are an urgent call for action by all countries, and really a shared blueprint for humanity, for peace and prosperity for people and the planet, both now and into the future. And I don't know about you, but I think at this moment in our history, that idea of a shared blueprint for humanity has never been more important or urgent or interesting. In particular, our panelists today are going to talk about the future of the fast-growing segment of the investment field known as environmental, social, and governance, or ESG. An approach that's really rooted in the idea that all investments have health, environmental, and societal impacts as well as financial returns. In recent years, ESG investing approaches have achieved increased prominence, and now they're now estimated to exceed $12 trillion in the United States alone, or more than 25% of total assets under management. So a very fast and growing sector of the investment field. I would like to introduce our speakers for today. You're going to hear from them one by one. So I'm going to start here on my left. Dr. Matthew Gardner is the managing partner and a founder of a company called SustainServe. Dr. Gardner really brings his background in environmental science and education to bring a very practical perspective to sustainability strategy development and really helping the Fortune 5,000 companies around the world quantify their sustainability impacts. He has a PhD in chemistry and spent 10 years in environmental research at MIT down in Boston. So next up, we'll hear from Dr. Aniket Shah. He's currently a senior fellow at Columbia University, but also a senior advisor on sustainable finance at the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Aniket has spent his career as a development economist and has been a pivotal player in the development of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. He's going to talk a little bit more about that. Most recently, he was head of ESG investing at Oppenheimer Funds. And then next up, we'll be hearing from Molly Bertourne. Molly is a proud UNH alum, both undergrad and grad, so welcome home, Molly. She's currently the Director of Social Research and Shareholder Advocacy at a company called Clean Yield Asset Management. She joined the team in 2017 after 14 years' experience in the socially responsible investing field. She has a BA in linguistics from UNH and also an MBA from the Poole College, also here at UNH. So that is Molly. And then last but no means least, we'll hear from Ned Dane. Ned is also a proud UNH alum. He plays a very active volunteer role here at the university. He's chair of our Investment and Finance Committee as part of the UNH Foundation. And he is newly appointed as the Chief Strategy Officer at Aiden Identified. So he will draw on that experience, but will also draw on his many years of experience in the field of sustainable investing. Most recently, he was Senior Vice President and head of Oppenheimer Fund's Private Client Group. So thank you all so much for being here. We're going to have a series of quick-fire rounds, about 5 minutes from each of our panelists, talking about their own perspectives and their own area of expertise, and then we'll have a couple of questions for the panel as a whole, and then we'll turn it over to you as an audience. So as we're going through this, please be thinking about questions that you would like to ask our panel. So we're going to start off with Matt, and we've asked Matt to talk a little bit about the Sustainable Development Goals. What are they? Why do they matter? Why should you care about them as students? But also, how is the business community increasingly embracing the sustainable embracing the Sustainable Development Goals as part of their business strategy? So over to you, Matt.
Great, thank you, Fiona. It's really a pleasure to be here, and it's great to see this room full of students. The way that I think about this stuff is that you are the next leaders of the world's economy. And so if we can get you folks thinking about how this stuff integrates into your everyday work so that when you're making decisions for the companies that you're working for or the companies that you're leading, you're doing so with an understanding of what sustainable business, what responsible, ethical, morally grounded business is all about. Fundamentally, many of you will be business people, and the role of business is to create value in the world, right? The question that I would encourage all of you to ask on a regular basis is, what does value mean? Is it just financial value? Which for many companies, that is at the top of the pyramid, right? I mean, that is what people, that is how business performance is judged in many cases. But we now know that there are a lot of other ways to define value, and we also know that there are many different factors that contribute to value creation that 5, 10, 20 years ago we weren't as aware of. So a company that is climate aware, a company that understands their role in society, that understands the issues of human rights. All of these things contribute in different ways, sometimes very empirically, sometimes indirectly, sometimes just reputationally, but all of these things have a role to play. And so your job moving forward as students and as future leaders is to understand what value means to you and what value means to your organization as you're moving forward. One quick side thing that I always like to say when I'm talking with students is that as you are leaving this place and going out and looking for jobs, the most important thing that you can do, particularly in a space like ESG and sustainability, which is a pretty hot sector these days. I mean, I've got a small company, and every time we have an opening for a position, we get 300 or 400 applications. What you need to be doing is networking like your life depended on it. So get out there, go to these events, talk to people, pick up the phone, send emails to people like me or others, and say, hey, can I have a coffee with you? Because when I get 300 or 400 resumes on my desk, those that rise to the top are the ones that I've had coffee with before. Or it's someone who's reached out and said, I want to learn more about the work that you do. So be bold, get out there and network like crazy, because that is how jobs are had, especially in markets like this. So with that, I'll stop kind of preaching about that. Keep forwarding, all right. All right, SDG essentials. So I was asked to come and just talk about the SDGs. So I'm going to talk for 5, maybe 6, 7 minutes, we'll see, on the SDGs and how I see it impacting the world. So I'll talk first about my background and my company and what we do as context. So I'm a chemist by training. I did not go to business school. I'm not a PhD economist, but I was fortunate to get a good technical background, got a doctorate in chemistry at Michigan State University, and then went and did a postdoc at MIT. And I was telling the story at lunch that when I started at MIT, the professor that I was working for was a chemist, kind of senior guy, within a few years of hanging it up and getting out. And we recognized a mutual interest in this topic of sustainability. And so he was in a position where he could do whatever he wanted as a tenured senior faculty member. He didn't really care anymore, and he just kind of said, okay, do it. And so within 3 or 4 months of me starting my postdoc at MIT, I found myself in the boardroom at Ford, talking with executives about Ford's early sustainability program. This is back in the late 1990s. So it's pretty heady stuff for a young chemist to go in there and to be hearing these conversations about how this major corporation is thinking about their role in the world and the environmental impacts that they're having. So the other kind of lesson learned from all of that is that you never know what journey, what path life is going to take you on. So I mean, I again started out as a chemist. I thought I was going to be a professor of chemistry or work in a research lab somewhere. So whatever your major is now, it does not define you. It does not, put you into a bucket that you have to be in for the rest of your life. I mean, follow your passions and follow the opportunities that present themselves. So I had the opportunity to start a company during my time at MIT, I realized with a couple of colleagues that there was an opportunity to work with companies on this stuff and to help them think about what this thing called sustainability means. Back then, in 2001 when we started the company, there wasn't a lot of companies who were really into this. And there was, honestly, there was just beginning to be the pressure that you'll hear about over the next little while from my colleagues here. There wasn't all the pressure for companies to do this. It was mostly companies who, where the leadership, the CEO, had simply decided that this is how he or she was going to run their business. And they had that kind of commitment. The Gary Hirshbergs at Stonyfield Farms and, Chad Holliday at DuPont. They just kind of got it back then and were committed to the idea. But moving forward, more and more companies are facing pressures to be thinking about this stuff. It could be regulatory pressure in some case. It could be market opportunities. So companies see the opportunity to put a green product on the market or to be seen as a responsible ethical corporation. A lot of purchasing power out there, particularly among the millennials, is partly driven by the values and cultures of the organizations that are selling those products. And so they need to match that if they want to realize their potential in the marketplace. Sometimes there's efficiency opportunities for companies, where they can just, use less resources, use less energy, produce less waste, so they can improve their business model. So there's a variety of factors out there. But and so we saw this opportunity to start a company, and so we started SustainServe in Boston and in Zurich, Switzerland, and we've had this office, these offices in both places ever since. One bit of advice to you is that if you go start your own company, do not start it in 2 locations at once. It's kind of silly. If you've ever been to Switzerland, it's a beautiful place. Zurich is a beautiful city. It is one of the more expensive places on the planet. And so if you're starting a company, starting it in one of the most expensive cities in the world is also not super advisable. But we've done it, and it's, we're almost 20 years old and have built a nice little business out of doing this. And so like I said, we work with companies who have decided that this is something they need to pursue still to this day. And it's Fortune 5,000 companies. And they range from asking us how to do a greenhouse gas inventory to designing a business strategy that incorporates sustainability into their business to, considering the sustainable development goals and how do they impact their business and what are the opportunities there. And so it's really the consulting space. Many of you may become consultants, management consultant types. It's different every day. Each client is different, has its own unique pressures, their own unique way of looking at the world. Our job is to be good listeners and to go in and understand what's driving it. One of the, this framework here is just something kind of how we see the world these days, and it's just a context setter. Really what it is that there's all kinds of global trends out there, climate change, technological and energy innovation. I personally think that the movement towards increased transparency in the world, if a company does something somewhere in the world, it is going to be tweeted about instantly. And everyone will find out about it very quickly. 20 years ago, if you had a factory in Bangalore burned down, People might hear about it, might not. Okay, now people are, taking FaceTime live videos of it, and it's all over the place. So transparency is a huge driver, I think, for responsible, ethical corporate action. But all of these things here are inspiring business, are motivating business to develop strategies to address it and to incorporate sustainability, responsibility, ethics into their core business strategies. So we see that happening. Well, those strategies then need to be implemented and executed upon, so you need to understand how you're performing against those strategies. What are the metrics? What are the key performance indicators that you're looking at to know that you're making progress against the goals that you've set? And that's where the SDGs, and I'll come back to the SDGs, that's where the SDGs come in really importantly there. So those things then, once you are implementing your strategy, then you're gonna talk about it and communicate internally, externally. Your employees wanna know, why are we doing this? Those, young people who are coming and interviewing for jobs want to know what the sustainability or climate policy or responsibility culture is at the organization. All things being equal, people want to work for companies with whom they share values. And so that's a really important part of the communication exercise. And then all of that together, in my opinion, drives value creation. And it drives value in this broader sense. That it's, yes, financial value, very important. It's absolutely critical for a company to be sustainable, is to have a viable business model, right? But at the same time, there are many factors that contribute to value creation that we're now aware of. So if we take a little bit of a wider angle lens on this thing called value creation, then we can start to understand some of these factors that maybe we need to be managing more effectively. And so that's where this is just a slide that just shows a bunch of companies I've worked with over the years. But basically, what the point here is that these are large companies, these are small companies. These are in financial services, energy companies, chemical companies, food, all over the world. Okay, and everyone's facing this stuff. No one is immune to being asked about responsible corporate behavior. I had an older gentleman approach me at a conference I was speaking at recently, and he comes up to me and he says, I'd love to talk to you about your work. I don't think we can afford you guys. So we're talking, and it turns out that he was the chief operating officer of a 200-person baking company in Central Mass. And they do $10 million a year in revenue, or something fairly modest as a small baking company. If you go to a grocery store in the northeast of the U.S. and you buy a frozen chocolate eclair, then these guys probably made it. Okay, so he came to me and he said, I've got an issue here, and that is that we're being asked about our sustainability performance, about our greenhouse gas inventory. That someone's asking us to do a carbon disclosure project report, all this stuff. And it turns out that 40% of his revenue came from which big retailer? Walmart. So Walmart, who is really pushing on their suppliers to be driving corporate sustainability and asking their suppliers, their 100,000 plus vendors, to be doing sustainability related stuff. It extends all the way down to a 200-person baking shop in central Massachusetts that makes chocolate eclairs. So you see it all the time, and increasingly everywhere. So you are not immune. You cannot hide from this stuff any longer. So the SDGs. The Sustainable Development Goals. So I talked about key performance indicators and metrics, and it's really important, I think, if you have decided that a topic is important to you for whatever reason, then you need to understand what you're aspiring to. What are you driving to? What are you trying to improve upon? What are you managing? The Sustainable Development Goals are a product of the UN, and are 17 goals that have 169 indicators associated with them, so metrics. So each goal has a set of targets associated with them that they are looking to improve upon. And it's really an EKG for sustainable development in the world. I mean, if we can improve upon all of these different targets, ranging from climate change to life underwater to human rights to, you can see them here, climate action, zero hunger, good health and well-being, they're really comprehensive. And so if you can show that you're driving improvement, if you're performing against some or all of these, then you can make the case that you are making the world a better place. You are improving upon the sustainable development of the world. The challenge I would put out there, and the thing I would like you to keep in mind, is that no one company can address all these things. No one company, there's no one company that all of these factors, in my opinion, drive value creation or are part of the value creation equation. And so you need to be careful. Companies need to invest their limited time, limited energy, limited resources in those places where they can really enact and affect the most change. And so that's my challenge to you folks, is that as you're thinking about sustainability in your future careers, to be really thinking about where can we have the biggest impact? Which of these topics up here are the ones that really drive value creation for my organization? Again, value in the broad sense. But again, you need to focus your time and energy in those places where you can have the biggest impact. So I'll leave it at that for right now and turn it over to my colleagues. And again, network like crazy. I'm happy to talk to any of you after this. I think that I might be here for a little while, but so please reach out.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. So, Annika, you were at the United Nations in the lead up to the development of the Sustainable Development Goals, and a little while after they started being implemented. Could you just build a little bit on what Matt's talked about why the SDGs are important, but also kind of the role that private capital investment is going to play in helping the world achieve the Sustainable Development Goals?
Sure. No, I'm very happy to. But before I do, I just want to thank you and thank all of you for having us here. It's really a great pleasure to be in New Hampshire, and thank you for spending your afternoon with us. So before I talk about that question, I want to remind you all what the challenge is when it comes to sustainable development. So let me give it to you very clearly. We live in a world today with approximately 7 billion people. Over our lifetimes, that will go from 7 billion to roughly 10 to 11 billion by mid-century in the second half of the century. We have a $80 trillion world economy. That's our gross world output, which will become roughly $160 trillion over the next 30 years. In other words, we will double the world economy because the world economy grows roughly at 3.5% a year over long-term averages. We need to somehow do that. We have to somehow bring 3 to 4 billion people onto this planet, double the world economy, at a time where inequality is increasing in every country, and we're destroying the environment. So the goal is, how do you bring 4 billion more people onto the world, double the economy, and take carbon dioxide emissions to zero? Emissions which, by the way, have been going up at 3% a year for the last 100 years. It's one of these almost facts of life that emissions and growth have been completely coupled with one another. That's the challenge. That's what all of you have to think about, and it should excite you because, wow, we've never done this before. Humanity has never, ever, ever done what we're going to try to do over the next 30 to 40 years. What an incredible question to spend your life working on. Okay, so where are we? Where are we in this effort? For wisdom, I always go to literature. And so in 1859, Charles Dickens wrote A Tale of Two Cities, and he started that book with a very powerful set of sentences. He said, "We live in the best of times, the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us," and on and on and on. And that's where we are when it comes to the topic of sustainable development and business and the world. Why is it the best of times? It's the best of times because there are 300 of you in this room talking about these issues, thinking about it. The awareness around sustainable development is now unquestioned. Matt has spent his life advising companies. We've worked on the investment side. You can't go into a serious discussion today without this coming up. That was hard to believe. Matt was 20 years ahead of his time when he started his company. We've now all caught up, and that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Why is it the worst of times? And I'm asking you to be a little skeptical here. It's the worst of times because despite all of the good efforts, despite all of our conferences, discussions, meetings, regulations, protocols, and so forth, we are actually moving in the wrong direction on every underlying real economy. I'm an economist, so I actually look at the real economy figures, and it's getting worse, not better. So that's an interesting thing. That's why it's the worst of times, because the juggernaut that is the world economy isn't actually moving in the right direction. Third, the Sustainable Development Goals. So the SDGs came about really because of a brilliant vision of the UN Secretary General at the time, Ban Ki-moon, who looked at the predecessor to the SDGs, which were the Millennium Development Goals, which were developed by a brilliant Secretary General named Kofi Annan, with a very simple idea, which all of us know with our daily lives we do on a daily basis, which is you gotta set goals. If you don't set goals and we just talk about this in an airy-fairy way, you never move things forward. So he said, why don't we actually set goals for the world? How crazy. By 2030, we want to achieve these things. And if you set the goals, then we figure out how business, how government, how private sector can all achieve them. And we're now going through that process right now. The question was around private capital. Let me ask you all a question. We have estimated that it takes $3 to $4 trillion of annual additional investment, public and private, for the SDGs to be achieved. Who here in the room thinks that's a lot of money? $3 to $4 trillion a year. Raise your hand. Hi. Who here thinks that's not a lot of money? Please. Good. I see one hand over there. $3 to $4 trillion is 3% of world GDP, roughly, that we can spend to save us from disaster. Our job in the financial community is how do you channel the world saving into those investments, public and private? That's a huge question because it requires regulation, it requires the right institutions, the right products, the right frameworks, and we'll get into that. But the basic number is for a little bit of world output, we can actually solve many of these problems. And so our job is to figure out how to do it with all of you. And to end, I'll just say about business and universities. This is a very powerful thing you have here because on this stage, you'll see interdisciplinary backgrounds. Amongst all of you, there's also interdisciplinary backgrounds because to do this right, you need economists, you need physicists, you need sociologists, you need anthropologists, you need lawyers, you need business people, and on and on and on. And that's where why do businesses need all of you? It's not just because of your demand that you want sustainable products, it's because you all are now learning in an interdisciplinary way solutions to these problems. And so you're in a special place and we're happy to discuss how we can move forward together. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Aniket. So Molly, you work for a firm in Vermont. You're a certified B Corp, but you're also a firm that is really helping direct that flow of capital into things that support the Sustainable Development Goals. So could you just tell us a little bit more from your perspective about how this is playing out in the world today?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I do want to say it's such a treat to be back here. It's been about, I think, 10 years since I finished my master's here. And while so much has changed, so much is still the same. It feels really good. So thank you all. So I'm going to take this conversation from the 30,000-foot view, which is both aspirational and in some ways theoretical, and talk about what this means on the ground for an asset management firm in Vermont. To give you some perspective on sort of how this stuff is actually happening, how this stuff really works in practice. To do that, I want to provide a little bit of context on my firm, who we are, how we operate, and I also want to touch on the role of B Corps because I think that's relevant to this conversation as well. So I work for Clean Yield Asset Management. We are a boutique investment management firm. We manage money for individuals and families, and we invest primarily in small and mid-cap companies that we think are undervalued by the market. We also use environmental and social criteria in our investment process. So we use environmental and social factors when picking our investments. We think those that are managing their environmental impacts well, managing human capital well, are better investments for the long run. And when we invest in companies, we also raise environmental or social issues with the company that we think may be underaddressed or pose risk to companies. It probably doesn't surprise you then that we're a B Corp. And I want to see a show of hands. When I say B Corp, how many of you are familiar with B Corps? Awesome.
Better than it used to be.
I know, it's pretty awesome. And how many of you are wearing something from a B Corp or regularly shop with a B Corp? Okay, all right, that's some of you. That number is increasing too. So it sounds like most of you are familiar with it, so I won't belabor the point. But when you become a B Corp, you take this, you sign on to this Declaration of Interdependence, which in my view says it all. That you commit to being a business for good and operating as if the environment, people, communities matter. The other thing I would say too is that the first B Corps were certified in 2007. Clean Yield did not become a B Corp until 2011. And that's because when the first B Corps came on the scene, this little investment firm in Vermont thought, we're already doing this. There's nothing here that's new. And it took 3 years of heated internal debate to finally figure out that this is actually a movement, that there is something bigger here than this little investment firm in Vermont, and came up with 3 reasons why it made sense for us to become a B Corp in 2011. And I put these out there because I want you to keep these in your back pocket, because the B Corp community is growing, and there may be an opportunity for you when you're out there someday to make this case for why B Corps make a difference. The first thing to be a B Corp is that the B Corp codifies what it means to be a business for good. It lays out the environmental and social criteria that a business must meet in order to be a B Corp. It verifies that, so you can't just say you're doing this stuff. They actually send somebody out to look at your documents and make sure that you're doing this stuff and you've got the policies and practices in place to back it up. There's validity in that. There's also validity in being in good company, right? Patagonia, Etsy, Seventh Generation. These are all businesses that are doing really important work that are going to be part of the solutions. These are businesses that are thinking about the long run. And the last is that it encourages continuous improvement. So Clean Yield's been lucky enough to be in the top 10% of B Corps for the last few years. That gets harder every year because B Corp keeps raising the bar. They keep adding to the criteria one needs to meet to stay up there. But it's also getting more competitive. There's more businesses figuring this stuff out. And as the person in my firm who's accountable for that score, I'm working really hard to make sure that we stay there, which is a really important thing. That's how continuous improvement happens. So you would think investment firm that thinks about environmental social issues is a B Corp. The SDGs would be our sweet spot, right? This should be part of what we're thinking about every day. And we are, but we're not calling it that, right? So Clean Yield in our day-to-day business, we're creating impact. We do that through our shareholder advocacy. So as I mentioned earlier, when we invest in a company, for example, we invest in some real estate companies. When we invest in a real estate company and we don't see them reporting on energy use or greenhouse gas emissions, we ask about that, right? We're big believers in what gets measured gets managed and what gets reported gets done. So frequently, if we're not seeing something so fundamental as that reported, we're asking a company about it and bringing them through disclosure and ultimately through goal setting to reduce their impact. That's one way we have impact. Is it contributing to the SDGs? It might be, right? We're helping these big real estate companies reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. That goes right back to the SDGs. But I'm not calling it that. We also do direct investments in small and growing businesses. So we have a portfolio of investments in New England-based businesses that are mission-driven. We are unique in that we are not traditional private equity investors who want to get a 15% return and be out of there in 3 years. We are patient capital. We are mission-driven and aligned. We do want to generate a return, but we want to make sure that the mission is baked into the business going forward. We think that these investments help create the economy that we want to see, and also are creating shared value, right? That these are businesses that are creating value for their employees, their community, the environment. We also do some public policy work, which I think is unique among investment management firms. Every year I go to the Hill in DC and talk about issues related to sustainable investing. I frequently go up to Montpelier and talk to folks up there about investment world and what investors are worried about. We also use our philanthropic capital to make systems change using policy. So right now we're supporting an initiative to make Vermont the first state in the country to feed every child breakfast and lunch at school at no cost. And again, that's another one where it goes back to the Sustainable Development Goals, but I'm not talking about it in those terms. And so I want to talk about how it does intersect with our world, right? The way we see the SDGs is as a framing for work that's already happening. The companies that we invest in are talking about the SDGs. I was researching a materials company from Denmark yesterday that reports that 82% of its revenue is aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. They brought in PricewaterhouseCoopers to do an audit, and that's what they found. It sounds pretty fancy. I don't think the business has changed because of that. I think it's a new way of talking about the business's impact. It certainly raises the importance of these issues with a new audience, but I don't know that that's new capital. We see investment management firms aligning their investment strategies with the SDGs, which is great to see. Investors can now pick a mutual fund where 90% of their assets are addressing some of the sustainable development goals. That's fantastic. And there may be some new capital there deployed for the SDGs, but it's probably relatively small. It also creates a new way for us to talk to clients, right? It provides a new framework to talk about the types of impact that we have. So we do hear this language, we see it in our world, but the amount of capital that's being directed with the SDGs is still relatively small. And for context, BlackRock is one of the largest asset management firms out there, and BlackRock has been making pretty sizable investments in renewable energy infrastructure in recent years. In 2017, they raised $1.5 billion specifically for renewable energy infrastructure. This year, they're hoping to raise another $2.5 billion. Now, from where I sit at a little investment firm in Vermont, I think, well, that's $3.5 billion. That's money, right? That feels big. But then I look at the funding gap for the SDGs in the trillions of dollars, and the gap still looms pretty large. If you think about it in terms of time, if you were to take 1 million seconds and put that into days, it would take 11 days, right? 1 million seconds is 11 days. If you were to take 1 billion seconds, it's 31 years. If you were to take 1 trillion seconds, that would be 31,709 years. The difference between 1 billion and 1 trillion is meaningful. Now, when you look at it in terms of global GDP, it is actually relatively, right, it feels doable when you come at it from that perspective. And I think what this says is that it's not necessarily the size of the gap, it's the coordination that needs to happen to fill it, right? That there's so many different pieces that need to come into play to begin to fill this gap and begin achieving these global goals. I'm not generally one to be the cynic, but this is one where I feel like there's still a lot of work to be done and a lot of collaboration that needs to happen. And the priorities are pressing. There's some urgency that needs to be paid here.
Urgency indeed. Yeah, thank you, Molly. So, Ned, Mellie and Ned, you're both UNH alums, and I know you're super proud of the fact that we are one of the highest ranked universities in the country for sustainability, and it's been something we've been doing here at UNH for 20 plus years. And we're super proud we're the third best university in the country in terms of sustainability. So, Ned, could you talk a little bit about sort of the important work that you're doing as part of the foundation board as an alum to help this university continue our role in sustainability, but specifically how it relates to our investments here at the university?
Sure, thank you. And thank you all so much for coming today. It's really quite remarkable to see this crowd, this size, of a group at a university talking about these topics. This is something I'm incredibly passionate about. I've spent 30 years since being here at UNH, working in finance, and about halfway through that career, I woke up to the importance and the ability to think about investing and directing capital that could be aligned to things that you care about and aligned to things in the world around you. And the first 15 years, I just was unaware that there was the ability to put those things together. So maybe before I go into the story about what we're doing in the endowment, I came here to UNH as first a biology major, and took my first chemistry class and realized that I was really not made out for that. So I quickly became an English major, and I've spent my whole life in finance. So to Matt, your point, it doesn't matter, where you start out and where you end up. Life is all about finding opportunities. And so I think, that's an important thing to know. You don't have to be on a narrow path. You can keep a very wide lens. And sometimes the most remarkable thing is 2 degrees off of what you thought you were focused on in the beginning. The other thing that I would also like to say is, UNH is an incredible place to graduate from. And, I left here a long time ago in 1988. I was at a UNH event this past week, and I saw a guy that I used to play mud football with out on the lawn at SAE. He was a Beta brother. He's the CEO of a biotech company now. And he's not the rarity. There are so many successful people from this university across all walks of life, and we actually really care about helping people from UNH. So I always say life is a contact sport. I'm a contact. We're all contacts. We all are here to help, and so take us up on that, because it is really important to help get smart people from UNH out into the world, into something that they're passionate about. So let me talk about my passion, which is thinking about how you connect purpose and a portfolio. And so about 6 years ago, I was asked to come back here and to join the UNH Foundation Board, and I was very honored to do that. There's many things that our board does. We sort of serve as an advisory group to the president and to the senior faculty around here. But one of the really important things that we do is we're in charge of looking over the UNH endowment. And so the endowment is the money that pays for scholarships, pays for endowed professorships for some of the wonderful people that you come in contact with every day here. And it's really important. And so when I think about the job of being involved in the endowment, the big job is we have to be here to provide the scholarships that many of you get today, but we have to do it for your kids and your kids' kids and their kids. So it's money that has to grow and last basically forever, and it has to pay out to meet scholarship needs. So being involved in that is a really important role, and it's something that nobody that is involved takes very lightly because of the importance of that. So the UNH endowment is about $220 million. And when I joined the board, it was a lot less than that. We had a big campaign over the past few years that's helped that grow. And along the way, one of the things that as I came back on campus and started meeting great students, one of the things that I started seeing were students that were very passionate about how we were investing that endowment. So we had some students that wanted to know, are we using energy companies? Are we investing in oil companies? Those sorts of things. And so it was great to have a great dialogue and engagement with those students to sort of talk through their concerns and help them understand what we were trying to do in the portfolio. All along the way, though, we saw this path to opening up the door to shifting the way that we did things within the endowment. So sort of very proud of the outcome. Over the past year, we've moved about $42 million into a portfolio that behaves exactly like the rest of the portfolio, except it's managed with managers that focus on these issues around environmental, social governance, and with a real focus on addressing the issues that Annika brought up around climate change. So, we did the hard work of finding a bunch of really great portfolio managers that could help us in that mission, and we could build a portfolio that looks quite like what we already have. So we're still delivering on that promise for your children's children's children to be there when it's their turn to get scholarships and to need that money. But we're doing it in a way that I think is also aligned to the future. And it's really kind of just the beginning, because now we have this great portfolio that the people who are out trying to raise money and get people to give more money to UNH can point to and say, this is something that we're doing and it's quite unique. So it's really, I think it's very special. In my career, I come across a lot of different universities that have maybe sort of danced around this subject or not been as purposeful about moving ahead. I think UNH is a real leader in this effort, and I think we're really just getting started. So it's exciting to be part of that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ned. So we're going to turn it over to the audience for questions in a couple of minutes. So be thinking about questions, challenges, things that you're perplexed about. But just before we do that, I want to just pose a couple of questions for the panel just to have a little bit of a dialogue around. So, I can't help but think that this is sort of, we're here in a month that is a pretty important month, right? Sort of in the history of capitalism. It's pretty much 50 years since Milton Friedman kind of published his seminal piece in the New York Times that put us on this path that, shareholders, the interests of shareholders are of primary importance, and really the job of a business and the business leaders is to maximize financial returns. And then really just earlier I guess it was last month now, the Business Roundtable came out with a really important statement. 200 of the CEOs of the biggest companies in America have said, actually, that idea of shareholders only is no longer enough, that we have to embed the interest of other stakeholders in the purpose of the corporation. So we're sort of at a pretty important moment in history, but I think we still have this sort of elephant in the room, right? Which is that somehow we believe that if we pay attention to social and environmental issues, that's going to come at a cost, and that's going to somehow decrease financial returns. We sort of, are asked to make this choice between sort of doing well and doing good. So I want to just address that because I think a lot of students are probably thinking about that. I'd love to hear your response to that. Is that a true statement, or is that sort of a myth that we need to dispel? Whoever wants to jump in can jump in.
Maybe I'll start for a second. So I don't think we're all ready to jump in on this. There's not a choice, right? You don't have to say it costs something to care. In fact, some of the names that you saw up on the slide before are some of the best run companies in the world, right? They also happen to be amazing at this, right? Think about Patagonia or other places. Those are sustainable businesses from the standpoint of being a company that's going to be around and relevant for a very, very long time. But they also have a moral compass, and that's part of why they're so good, right? So I don't think there's a choice at all. I do think one of the things that I always look at is, there's a lot of people are always trying to come up with sort of a binary answer. If you care, does it cost money? Is it better to be a passive investor or an active investor? And there's always a continuum and a blend that is the one that probably makes sense. But I can show you some absolutely horrible ESG managers. I can show you some absolutely horrible non-ESG managers, and the converse is true as well. There are people who are good at what they do, and they tend to be the places that attract a lot of investor capital, and there are people that aren't, and they might have it for a while, but it goes. So I don't think it's, your performance isn't, different because you're ESG or not ESG. You can find good and bad in all of it, but our experience of the endowment, as an example, and it's only 3 years long, but the ESG portfolio has outperformed the other one by about 2% over the past 3 years, which is meaningful. Now that won't last forever. That will wax and wane, but so far so good. We're off to a great start.
Yes, and.
Yes, and.
I think it's important to point out that from an investment research perspective, that this is about including more information. It's not so much about what you exclude. So when I'm researching a company for potential investment, we're doing the fundamental analysis. We're evaluating the team. We're looking at the track record. We're doing the discounted cash flow. We're doing this analysis. We're also looking at environmental liabilities, right? We're looking at employee turnover. We're looking at metrics that we think are material to the business to see how well the company is managing, right? And in that perspective, we're actually just looking at more indicators, not less. The idea being that when you turn over more stones, you're more likely to find the thing that will either lead the company to success or risk. And so my view is that when you consider more information, you have a fuller picture, can make a better informed decision, excuse me, and the results should be better. The other thing I would say too is that in the body of research on this question, you can find any answer that you want to this question. So if you want to find research that says that this type of investing will cost you, you're welcome to find that. It exists. It's right there with some of the climate skeptic research, I'd say. But there are a number of longitudinal studies that have looked at the body of research. There's also some studies that have looked at performance over longer periods of time. Morgan Stanley just came out with a new one that looks at fund performance from 2004 to 2018, 11,000 funds. They found that the financial performance of these 11,000 funds are in line regardless of whether or not they use ESG factors or not. So performance alpha generation is about the same. It's not statistically different, but when the markets are down or particularly volatile, those ESG funds are holding up better. It makes sense, right? Because these are companies that are managing risks in fuller ways. So I think there is this myth that still exists out there, but I think if you dip into the research, you can find a pretty compelling argument that in fact it isn't that this could help value, not hurt value,
Help
but
financial
intuitively.
value, just to be clear.
Yes.
Yeah. Jump in, Annika?
Yeah, let me give a different perspective. I think there is a cost, actually. But it's how you define the word cost. Because cost, you can think about how much it would cost more for a company to pay their employees more, right? That is an expense item on an income statement. But the question is, are you actually getting value? Is there more benefits than the cost? And there's a temporal dimension to all of this. Do you think of it as a cost, or do you think about it as an investment that pays itself out over time? So there's a financial cost, to be sure, for corporations to, take care of their employees more, to pay people more, to look after the environment. But the question really is, what are the benefits and over what dimension of time? And I think that's the more interesting way of thinking about it, number one. Number two, there are also cognitive costs. Okay, and this is something as practitioners you will all soon realize that it's always difficult to change a system. It's always difficult to learn new things. There is a path to least resistance, which is doing what you always do. And I saw this because, like others here, I worked in the fund management industry. To actually get people to change what they're doing is very hard. And it does put a cost. You can actually price that out. Again, the question is, what are the benefits of that cost and that investment? I think that's the more interesting question. So, but to say that this is just snap your fingers, everything's sustainable, well, then you're not actually changing anything. So the one maybe difference of opinion I have with Molly is that the SDGs are about actually changing things. It's not about reassigning what you're already doing. That is a terrible way of thinking about this whole project. It's such a weak, not that you're thinking about it, that the world is thinking about it like that. We can't do that because deeply embedded in the SDGs is that we need a different path. Okay, so if you're just doing what you used to do, calling it SDGs, then we're on the wrong path. So that's about the cost. Just a word about Milton Friedman. Believe me, I'm not here to defend Milton Friedman, but there's an important point about Friedman that especially the economists in the room have to understand, is that Friedman, when he wrote Capitalism and Freedom, and then when he wrote this article in the New York Times in 1970, he basically said that, yes, shareholder value, primacy, blah, 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 but it was in a world of perfect competition, and it was in a world where business and government operated in distinct lanes. He basically said, government needs to set the rules, business plays by that rules, within those rules, businesses should make money. Where he completely got it wrong, either out of naivete or stupidity, was that he didn't realize that business can change the rules of the game. So yes, business can lobby like the fossil fuel industry has done for 50 years against any real regulatory reform in the energy sector when it comes to renewables, which is why we subsidize fossil fuels at multiples what we do of renewables in this country. And so within that, the Friedman approach would make sense if we had a social cost of carbon, we were putting a price on it, blah, 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 and then within that we all have this perfect competition between businesses. This is why understanding politics and political economy is very important, and any good economist is actually a political economist because you have to understand what's happening with the rules of the game that are set by governments.
So in my opinion, the business of business is to create value. But we need to have a wider angle lens on what value means. And we need to incorporate these new factors that we are now aware of in that value calculation. So can a company simply spend money on ESG and sustainability stuff and see no return in it? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they can come and they can just, pour money into a black hole and, never to be seen again, and it will not contribute to their overall creation of value. So I think in the companies that I work with, we always encourage them to understand that if you are going to be investing in training and development of your employees, to really understand what that return is. I've got a client whose, their sole sustainability program 5 years ago was that they invested or they donated money to an orphanage in Cambodia, which is a noble thing to do, but that was their sustainability program. Over time, what they've realized, though, so I was kind of skeptical. I was saying, that's great. Do that on your own time, but don't call that a corporate sustainability program. What they've realized over time, though, is that was a really important part of how they engage their employees. And engaged employees are more productive employees. They're more loyal. They'll stick around. You don't have to train them as often because you're replacing them. So there's many different angles that you can look at this from, but you really need to understand how are these activities, how are these ESG factors related to my overall value creation equation. Another company in the Boston area that I know put every single one of the 17 SDGs up in their sustainability report and said, we support them all. And okay, I'm glad to hear that you've got this moral support for all of the SDGs and the SDGs as a concept. But they're really making these kind of tenuous connections back to their business. The fact that they fed their employees lunch at the cafeteria is they're contributing to SDG, whatever it is about
Zero hunger.
yeah, solving hunger in the world. So I kind of walked them back from that cliff, and I think they're starting to see the light on that one. But at the same time, though, so the point is that when you are engaging in ESG stuff, in corporate sustainability programs, or with the SDGs, to really understand which ones are the ones that are aligned with your business, which are aligned with your stakeholders' interests, and which really support your overall value creation model. And then invest in those. Spend your time really contributing to those and moving the needle on those. That's how that's how a company can really be a sustainable company, one that's in business for a long time.
I think what we're hearing on the panel is not just business as usual, but actually we all need to rethink about how we do business, right? And changing some of our practices and our policies so we're actually, as you say, moving the needle on some of these SDGs, right?
Can I
Yeah,
respond?
please.
I want to respond to your comment, and it's just to say that I think impact washing is alive and well. That I think a lot of what we're seeing in relation to the SDGs is framing in SDG language without real change, without real delta. And to both of your points, what we need is change, and we need corporations to focus on where they can create value in this context. And that's the opportunity. And once that starts happening, change will happen. But I think we should all be aware as consumers, as investors, that impact washing is alive and well.
Absolutely. So I'm sure we're going to get into more of this, but I want to turn it over to the audience for some questions. So let's see if we have a question right up front. There should be a microphone. I'm just going to wait until it gets to you so everyone can hear. Right in the front, Faina. Thank you.
So kind of regarding to, I think what you said, or so, the idea that, climate change is a pressing issue, which we all agree. I certainly agree. You guys agree. The idea is to kind of have to play by the rules of the game in terms of politics, and unfortunately, right now, there's not a whole lot being done, at least in the United States, regarding lowering CO2 emissions. So I was thinking what about the idea of having a bipartisan compromise where all parties work together and try to create sort of a business-friendly incentive with a carbon tax paired up with a tax credit to sort of punish the businesses that aren't reducing their CO2 levels, and then sort of incentivizing the businesses that are reducing their CO2 levels and leaving revenue unchanged, so it kind of can get support from both parties, so something can finally get done to save our planet.
Yeah. So
It's like a question for Annika.
Yeah, so so this is the one thing that all economists would agree on when it comes to the environmental challenges is around carbon pricing. You have to price it because right now it's an externality, and if you internalize it, it would actually change behavior. Now, what this gentleman is saying is actually one of the only frameworks that has bipartisan, not political bipartisan support, but support within economists, the economics community of the left and the right, which is a carbon tax and dividend, which is to say, let's put a price on carbon.
Can you just for people who...
Yeah.
So just
what is the
explain-
price of
yeah,
carbon? Okay,
exactly.
so one of the issues with climate change, it's probably the issue, is that no one really pays for it themselves, okay? So if you go and emit carbon dioxide right now, there is no price that you're paying to emit that. Why? Because the impacts are actually felt by all of society, but not necessarily just you. So it leads to this massive free rider problem. So what economists have worked on for the last 40 years is basically saying we can put a price on this, and the price can do two things. Number one is that it can change behavior, right? So that if when you go and fill up your gas tank, it doesn't cost $30, but it costs $50, maybe you'll drive less. But also when government collects these taxes, they can go and invest in the solutions as opposed to the problems, right? Well, then you get into these issues around taxing, because there's one thing that both parties really hate, but one party really, really hates is tax. And so one of the compromise positions is that, okay, let's put a price on carbon, let's meaning the government collect that, and then redistribute it in a form of a dividend back to individual consumers, okay? And so there is a lot of support for this amongst people who know anything about this topic. The problem really, as someone who spends a lot of time in Washington with both parties, is that the vested interests of one industry really is so enormous, and they have a grip over the Republican Party that behind closed doors, many Republicans would say, yeah, of course I believe that's the right idea. But getting that through Congress is very, very difficult. And so what you're seeing in the US is you're seeing a lot of action at the state level, right? In California, New York, California has a fairly well-functioning cap and trade type system. We're seeing models like this pop up all around the country. And by the way, the other important point is that CO2 has declined in the US over the last 10 years, mostly because of the shift from coal to natural gas. But it's a one-time sort of shock, and it will probably, and actually last year it went up again. So the main point for the non-economic student here is that there are very elegant, simple solutions to this that have been known for a long, long time. Getting it through with the amount of vested interest that we have in this country is really the challenge. I think there are the initial beginnings, I would say, now. My read of the tea leaves is that Republicans are starting to accept that they're going to lose an entire generation of voters if they don't grab onto this topic. Let's see, though, how they vote. That's going to be the main question.
Great question. That's another question in the front here, Faina. Front row.
All right, but the next one's going in the back.
Okay.
Just a quick question. Thank you all for being here. When you're meeting with like a corporation like Ford, for example, and you're presenting to them why they should focus more on sustainability, what do you focus on in terms of, if you had 2 or 3 points maybe that you were trying to communicate to them as to why they should focus on it? What are those points and why?
It's a great question.
It comes back to this question of value creation. You know, where are there opportunities for them to create long-term value and to encourage them to think beyond just the financial returns, but what are the other factors that they agree or see as being important elements to them being able to be in business for the long term. So if they're having an issue around employee retention, or diversity and inclusion is a tremendously important issue for corporate boards these days, and for corporations in general. Understanding environmental liabilities, I mean, really it's a at some level it's a risk assessment process. You know, it's to understand where are there risks in the business that they might not have uncovered before. So it's really, you know, the first step is to have a conversation with them about, you know, it's really 3 things in my opinion. It's 3 questions that I ask them. So I don't go in and I don't tell them this is what you have to think about. It's more of a collaborative process. The first question is, what do your stakeholders care about? First of all, who are your stakeholders? And then what do they care about? What are they talking about? So those issues. The second issue is, where are you having significant impacts on the world? Because those can lead to liabilities, those can lead to opportunities to use less resources and lower or change your cost structure. So it's stakeholders, impacts, and the last one is, what are the issues that really contribute to value creation, you know, to your business model? Things that are important, or, you know, that rise to the top for all 3 of those questions are clearly ones that you want to be focusing on and spending time on. maybe there's things that are only important in one or two of those dimensions, and then you have to make an informed decision as to whether you pay attention or not. But what that allows you to do is to take, 17 Sustainable Development Goals, 169 targets, hundreds of potentially relevant issues that fall under this umbrella of sustainability. And it allows you to distill it down to maybe 10 that you should really focus on, and that, where you can drive the biggest change in the organization.
That's great. Vena, was there a question in the back? You wanted to, somebody in the back?
No, I was just trying to be inclusive.
Okay. Other questions for our panelists?
Yeah.
Oh, there is one. We found it. All right.
And then I'll come back. Kathy, do you have one? Or Eli, go ahead.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much for your discussion. It's very enlightening. What role do you see the traditional banking community play in this topic? Do they even have a role? Because most businesses are small, and yet they want to embrace these goals as well.
So I think the question obviously about, retail banks and community
Sure.
banks and, what role do they have to play in this?
So I think, many, even going up to the large banks, the largest banks in this country, have started to think about, do they have an ability to sort of direct capital to lending, to those sort of things, to businesses that are in this space? So, many large banks have raised large pools of capital sort of directed toward lending to businesses that are, focused on this. Even, at a more local level, we have investments in our portfolio from the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, which is much more local, and it's focused here, and housing access and those kinds of things. So, it is something that requires, the sort of the banking space to be, very cognizant and, quite frankly, to care about it. But I do see progress sort of even in the largest of banks to some extent, and all the way down to the smallest community banks too. So I think it's partially that. Would be my thoughts. Others have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think community development financial institutions, CDFIs, that's what New Hampshire Community Loan Fund is, are certainly part of the solution here. It's relatively small scale in the grand scheme, but they are already investing in a lot of these areas. And their missions tend to be well aligned. We invest in a number of small, mid-sized regional banks, and have a lot of these conversations around environmental and social issues and how that plays into their loan portfolios. And I would say it's early days for the ones that we're talking to about these issues, that they're starting to think about climate risk in their loan portfolios, but haven't quite figured out yet how to assess it. And I think there's really interesting opportunity there, because they, at least in the conversations we have, seem pretty interested and want to be part of the conversation, ready to learn.
So let me give you the bad news on this, if I may. There's a very important report, if you're interested in this topic, that just came out by the Rainforest Action Network. It's called Banking on Fossil Fuels 2019. It's the best analysis of the banking sector's lending with regards to climate change. And believe it or not, the banks have increased their lending to the fossil fuel industry since the Paris Agreement. And here in the United States, JP Morgan is in the lead, and they're accelerating their investments in fossil fuel lending. So it's a very difficult question around banks and these issues, because, on the one hand, in the United States, banks, there are certain regulations that they have to give a certain percentage of their lending into disadvantaged communities, and so on and so forth. Many firms give a nice story about that. The reality is that they're regulated, they're mandated to do that. I forget right now the name of that whole program. What is it called?
The Community Reinvestment Act.
Community Reinvestment Act. I wrote my doctorate on state banks, so there's a nice evolution of green banks that are popping up across the United States, state-funded, to push the investment into renewables. It's still a tiny, tiny fraction. The main point that I would say, my view, is in aggregate, the banking industry today still doesn't see these issues, particularly the environment, climate, and 2 degrees Celsius, as a risk that would fundamentally change the way they do lending. Otherwise, you would not have seen a major increase in U.S. lending and global banking lending into the fossil fuel industry.
Can I add on to that
So,
too?
well,
Are we out
we're
of time?
super quickly, because
Okay, just a quick plug to say that 350.org has picked up the research from Rainforest Action Network on banks and is looking at how to engage consumers in a campaign to look at the big banks, hold them accountable for how their loan portfolios look relative to climate change. So there may be opportunities for folks that are interested in that sort of activism.
So I'm going to ask our panelists to just think about one sentence, one or two sentences each, that you want to leave with the students as your kind of closing thoughts. But just while they're thinking about what they want to say, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you to our panelists, of course, for being here. And I just sort of want to say, sort of echoing what the panelists have said today, that if you're a student that cares about using your education and using your future career to really drive this kind of positive change we need in the world, I really encourage you to go and see some of our students and staff back in the back right of the room. There's a whole area there with information about how you can get involved in sustainability education, whether it's through our dual major in sustainability, whether it's through some of the other programs that we run through the Center for Social Innovation and Enterprise. They're all programs that are designed to allow students like you to learn the skills and to get the experiences about how you can be change makers in the world. So go check that out and get involved. But just closing thoughts from everyone? One sentence?
Sure. Life is a contact sport. Don't forget that.
Get in contact.
The UNH network.
Yeah, Molly?
Yeah, understand what ESG means and be conversant in it. If you can find ways to get it on your resume through classes or internships, do it. It will only help you as you enter the job market.
I would say keep learning and keep reading. Read as much as you can. Reading is not a superpower, but it gives you superpowers. So read.
And I would say stay engaged and learn how to be good communicators, particularly good writers. That is a skill that is wildly undervalued these days, or it's under-taught these days, but is incredibly valuable. And then lastly, network your ass off.
Thank you, everyone, so much.